Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast, like we always do. His name is Peter Solie, and he's going to tell us about which party he represents, what he does, and what he's about. So welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Peter Solie, and I am a Libertarian. I'm endorsed for the 109th House District in the state of Kansas. I am also an elected Libertarian. I serve on the City Council, the Lorraine City Council, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my views.
Sure. We congratulate you on getting elected as a Libertarian. All our candidates on this podcast are talk about how difficult that is, so we applaud you on doing that.
Thank you.
If you could first tell us about what lessons you learned from getting elected successfully on the City Council and how you're applying that this time around.
Sure. Well, very different than the current race I'm in. Lorraine has 120 people. I can text them all the night before and say, please vote for me tomorrow. And I've been successful in that. I did run for the 109th House 2 years ago, was unsuccessful. I can already notice a huge difference in that people recognize me in a way they did not recognize me 2 years ago.
Okay.
I expect a much more successful campaign this time around.
Okay. Sounds good. So,
more to answer your question is, last time I probably knocked on between 4,000 and 5,000 doors, and I will do that again this year. It's really hard to get to rural doors, but if you live in a city, there's a high probability that I'm knocking on your door. And I do yard signs. I have a nice piece of literature that I distribute. I have a fantastic website. I love my website.
Okay.
I want everybody to go to my website. Banners. I march in parades. I do it all.
Oh, good. Good. So what you did before that worked well. You're going to leverage that this time around as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I just love it when people talk to me because when I share, my vision for what needs to happen with the state of Kansas, I get a lot of agreement. It's really hard when people get in the voting booth. That R really calls to them. I'm in a very Republican district, and that R is really hard for people not to find that name and pull that lever.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a red state.
Yes.
Okay. So what led you to the Libertarian Party in the first place?
Well, I used to, when I was a Republican, I would talk to my reps and they'd tell me about how they were, they just couldn't change the liquor laws in Kansas because it would hurt the mom and pop liquor stores. And I would shake my head and say, it's not your job to protect them. I love mom and pop liquor stores. I don't want to hurt them, but it's not the job of the legislature to put their thumb on the scale and protect them. And they would agree with me, they say they're for limited government regulation. They want local control, but they've got their thumb on every possible scale, and they just need to stop doing it. The real catalyst was the day I left the party was the day after a Republican primary where Huell's Camp was our congressional representative. He was primaried because he went to Washington and did exactly what he said he was going to do. He was going to cut budgets. And he voted to cut the agriculture budget. And instantly he was primaried because you're not supposed to actually do what you say you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And that's when I left the party.
Yeah. Poor guy. It sounded like he was doing the right thing and he got punished for it.
Yep. And I just, he did what he promised he would do. But that you could say he did the quiet part out loud. And once you did that, then that was unacceptable. They didn't really mean it. You're just supposed to say it.
Oh my. So that sounds like a
And
very good
I'm
reason.
very much a limited government guy.
Okay.
There is a role for government, but certainly a lot smaller than what we currently have. And
So
I'm
you,
a 10th Amendment guy.
oh, you are.
We've got to bring decisions back. We need to bring them back to Kansas, but not to Topeka. There are things that need to be federal law, and that's outlined in the Constitution. Everything else belongs with the state. There are laws that need to be statewide, but quite honestly, most lawmaking needs to be done at the county level and at the city level.
Okay.
And I would just skip right over Topeka. Most of this needs to come right back to cities and counties.
Okay. So the way you interpret the amendment, you believe that stuff can filter down to the counties and the cities too, right?
Yes,
Not just the states.
yes. And
Okay.
I would limit, and I have a guess that the constitutional budget for the United States would be something like 1.5 trillion. The national
Oh,
defense,
okay.
the Secretary of State, the judicial, all of that, even at current spending, would be something like 1.5 trillion. But then I
Okay.
would tie that to GDP. And so if GDP grows, then the federal government can grow at that same level. But if you don't tie it to some restriction, they will just come up with 1,000 more programs that just have to be federal programs. And it would just balloon right back up to where it is now. But
Okay.
but
So
most of what
what is the current budget?
pardon?
What is the current budget right now, so they can compare with your ideal budget to the current budget?
I think the budget's like 4.5 or something, but they spend 7 or 7.5
Oh,
trillion.
okay. Okay, so it's
And of
like
course,
7
that's a
times
big
more
part of
than what you.
it's a huge problem is that they spend more than they collect. It's immoral because it leads to inflation. And if you limited that federal budget or what they could collect, and they must balance, there would then be money available for states and for cities and counties to pick up what the federal government used to do. I actually
So
believe it would be less total tax burden, but even if it were the
okay,
same, we would make much better decisions at the city, the county, and the state level about how to solve whatever the problem is that needs government
sure,
attention.
sure. So because when they spend more than they can make, their only choice is print more money, right? Because they have to get the money from
Yes,
somewhere, right?
it's currently $1 trillion every 100 days that they're printing, and that means inflation. And we've recently experienced inflation, and it will come roaring back. It's we're $35 trillion in debt, and if you're 65 or older, you're probably not going to pay much of that. But if you're younger than that, you've got to start paying on that debt. And that really creates a drag on the economy. On my website, it's called the National Debt Crisis. And I lay out a plan as to how to provide for Social Security, how to provide for Medicaid, because quite honestly, if you don't do that, it's a non-starter, right? You're taking away my Social Security, you're taking away my Medicaid, and even though I don't want those to be government programs, as a libertarian, I think people should plan for their own retirement. I'm
Sure.
enough of a realist to say as a country, as a government, we made that promise, and we don't get to just take something away once I've been paying for it for 40 years.
Oh, yeah,
You
sure.
can't just pull that rug out. But there has to be a plan. How do we get to a balanced Social Security? How do we get to a balanced Medicare program where whatever goes out is only what is coming in? A federal budget that pays for national defense and other necessary federal programs, a completely separate budget that covers the debt so that eventually the debt gets to zero, the Social Security debt gets to zero, and the Medicare debt gets to zero. And foreign money would flood to the United States. We would still be in debt for probably 100 years, but we would have a plan. Currently, we don't have a plan. And so people are afraid of the goodwill of the United States to make sure that our money is good. I have a plan to show them that our money is solid and we will pay our debts. And once people are convinced that we actually mean that, all kinds of foreign money would come our way, and our government, the money would be stabilized.
That sounds good.
And that doesn't sound like it's a state issue, but it is. It's a state issue because the states need to require the federal government to enforce the 10th Amendment. We also need to enforce it because whether it's next year or 3 years from now, the federal government's going to keep collecting our income tax and other fees. Right now, the state of Kansas gets $6 billion every year from the federal government that goes into our state budget. And our state budget is like 21 or 22 billion. Huge percentage of our state budget. That doesn't count grants that go to universities or school districts or any number of programs. This is a very hard number to find. I've done a lot of research and I can't find the number. But in the budget, the official budget, it's $6 billion. Well, once they get in more trouble, they're going to stop sending the money. They're going to keep collecting the taxes, but they're not going to send it back. And that will be a horrible day for the state of Kansas and every other state.
Oh, yeah. They're defaulting on their promises.
And every politician knows it. They'll all tell you that we're in trouble when it comes to debt, that we're in trouble when it comes to Social Security. But none of them are willing to promise or even outline a solution. On my website, petersolie.com, national debt crisis. I have a detailed plan to the extent that it is a principled plan. I don't have accountants or analysts or attorneys who can help me put really solid numbers together, but I have very close numbers to what would be required.
That makes sense, sure.
So I'm a person who said, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you're at what?
So I was going to say, when I talk to people at the doorstep, one of their main concerns that I point out to them is, this is a very red district, a very Republican district, and the Republicans keep telling people that they're for limited government, they're for financial stability. They want decisions made locally. They want a free market. And it's just not true. They want to regulate every possible business move that a person could make. And they are certainly not in favor of local governments making decisions. My district, I think the largest city in my district is less than 5,000 people. You can walk to City Hall if you live in a town with 5,000 people. And if it happens to be the county seat, you can walk to the courthouse. Your voice can be heard. Doesn't mean they're going to vote the way you want them to vote, but your voice is heard. It can be heard in Topeka. It can be heard in Washington, D.C. It's just a lot harder. And the real benefit of local decision making is it's a unique decision. As I said in the city council, most of the decisions are already made for us.
Oh.
If we're going to provide water, the state of Kansas tells us exactly what the purity needs to be and how often we need to test it. And it's just an endless number of decisions that are already made for us if we're going to say we provide water or sewer or whatever it is we provide. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. And I realize water probably is a unique item there, and that we really are concerned about, is that water safe? But there might be some decision we could make as a city council that would be different than whatever the state standard is, and our citizens would be happy with that decision, but we're never given that opportunity. It's, you must. There is no option. And it's that way with housing and with roads, with every decision we make. We're essentially told, this is what you must do. The decision we're making at city council level is, who are we going to hire to do it? How are we going to collect taxes to pay for it? But we're really not making a decision about what the policy is going to be.
Wow.
Policy decisions are made at a much higher level, and it should not be that way.
That's getting back to your 10th Amendment thing, right?
Yeah, it needs to be back at the county and the city level. Some decisions could be or should be at the state level, but I'm willing to be challenged on, what needs to be at the state level. The Constitution tells us what must be at the federal level, and I'm willing to live with that decision.
Sure. So how do we change that from the states making all the decisions? Is that changing the state laws, or how do we get back to where we want to be?
Well, my personal belief, and I believe it could happen multiple ways, but I think what has to happen is a constitutional convention. This is going to be true of all states. The day that Kansas doesn't get the money back from the federal government, all states are going to be in that same position, where the federal government will continue to collect taxes, but they won't send the money back. And so it will be, there are lots of reasons to have a constitutional convention, but
sure.
it really, I am convinced that regardless of the party, there are not going to be a majority of House members and a majority of senators and a president that would reorganize the federal government in a way where they would say, we are sending all these decisions back to the states. We are going to cut our budget by 80%. We are going to tie that to the GDP so that we don't continue to inflate the supply, the taxes that we collect. It is just not going to happen from Washington, D.C. It has to be forced upon them.
Oh my. Okay, so they're not going to do it on their own, so that's why we need those constitutional conventions.
That's why you need the constitutional convention. And the other option is the states do it. In theory, the state legislatures could enact some laws that somehow punish the federal government until they act. I'm not sure what that would be. I don't envision how that could work, but in theory, I guess it could.
Okay. So for the Constitutional Convention, that would be adding another amendment onto our Constitution, or would it be tweaking the 10th Amendment?
No, it would be, assuming there are no other amendments, it would be the 28th Amendment. It would probably actually be a series of amendments. One would be this tying the federal budget to the GDP. That would probably be one of them. There would have to be probably 2 or 3 items that currently aren't enumerated in the federal or the U.S. Constitution that we would say, yes, that's a federal responsibility. It needs to stay there. And then a restatement of the everything else goes to the states. But I believe it can be done. I have no doubt that it's an extremely difficult thing to do, but it is something that can be done.
Sure. Yep, that sounds good. That sounds like a good plan. I haven't heard anything quite like that before from our guests, so we appreciate you adding that extra idea, that extra vision.
Thank you.
So as of this call, we're getting close to election time. We're doing this call in the start of September. So is there anything different you're going to do in the last couple of months before the election, or are you going to keep doing what you've been doing?
So I spend every evening and all day Saturday campaigning. My wife is a very patient person.
Good.
So I'm knocking on doors. I will soon begin advertising on radio and newspapers. I am a person who's frustrated by early voting. It's a huge disadvantage to, I guess I'll use the term third party. It's a huge disadvantage to third party candidates. I can't imagine being a third party candidate in Pennsylvania where voting is starting. So I'm out knocking on doors for 2 more months, and some of these people have already voted. It's very much we're going to protect the Republicans and the Democrats, because the sooner you vote, then you can't recall that vote once you make it.
Yeah.
Certainly people who can't get out of the house, or we know you're out of town, very appropriate that you vote. I would be willing to look at all kinds of changes. I'd be in favor of a 24-hour vote, right? Let's start at 7 p.m. on Monday and close the vote at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And in a very small place, it's open during regular business hours, or regular polling hours. But if you want to go to the courthouse at 3 o'clock in the morning, because then that's when you're available, I think that's a really good solution. And maybe 5 days of voting prior to, but there's just no need for voting 2 months out from the election.
Oh, sure. Yeah, good point.
You may discover something pretty nasty about somebody that you don't want to vote for them.
Good point. Yeah, might come out at the last minute.
Yeah. Since this is a podcast that can be heard anywhere, I really hope people like what I just said.
Yep.
Running for office is very expensive. Last 2 years ago, I spent about $20,000.
Oh no.
$6,000 of my own money. And the solution I'm proposing affects everybody. I would love people to go to my website, petersolie.com. There's a donate button there, just like there should be. And I would love to have support from all of your listeners.
Sure. We can put those in the show notes.
Very good.
All right, Peter. We thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about your campaign.
It is my pleasure. I thank you for being willing to allow me, giving me the platform. I really appreciate it. I think it's an important message, and I thank you for your assistance in giving me the platform.
Sure thing. We wish you all the best in your campaign and everything else you do in life.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, take care and all the best.
Bye.